Welcome to the Paradise Paradox. So I'm going to present the second part of this interview that I did with my friend Dr. Aiden Gregg, talking about psychopathy, sociopathy, and his idea of a pococurante, which is somebody who just doesn't care about anything, someone who doesn't care about the truth, about other people, about the future, even about themselves in the future. So it's a different way to draw the lines about what we think about as psychopaths and the different kinds of ways that they relate. So people who care about the truth but don't care about the future and this kind of thing, the different variations on the theme that are possible. I'd love it if you check out our other podcast, the Multiversity podcast, which launched the other day with my friends. Check out the website, multiversitypodcast.com, and you can listen to some of the episodes there. We talk about philosophy, entropy, physics, theater, and improvisation, and a bunch of other things. I think it's going to be really interesting for people if you've been following the Paradise Paradox for a while. It's a way for me and my friends to take things to another level with our research and our discussion. So check that out, multiversitypodcast.com. Now let's get into this conversation with Dr. Aiden Gregg.
I'm sort of embarking on my own research program on identity and psychopathy. But I've thought about it a little bit. The way people are approaching it at the moment is say, okay, we have these traits which we can measure psychometrically and we can quantify people's standing on it. And then we can see how all these traits intersect with each other. But for the reasons I've given, it's very hard to come to an absolute answer about what's going on there. So my approach is to try and characterize psychopaths or people in that domain in a slightly different way. And there's no reason not to. Maybe, for example, historically, the categories we're using are not the best categories. So maybe we should just let them go and sort of redraw the circles from scratch. So that's sort of the way I've been thinking about it. So I have this idea of pococurante, which you mentioned at the beginning. So that's the word was used in a book by Voltaire, but a pococurante means not caring very much. Now, this is clearly already been used to characterize psychopaths, most notably when it comes to empathy. Psychopaths don't care about other people. They show a lack of remorse, a lack of guilt. They are prepared to do things most people are not prepared to do. And many people have tried to say, well, that's maybe the essence of it. They're not very friendly. They're very disagreeable and nasty. And look, when we characterize their brains, we know bits of brains light up when people are feeling nice or they're engaging in moral reasoning. And yeah, some studies show differences between psychopath brains and regular brains. So actually, one line of research on this is by a guy called Kiehl. He has a book called The Psychopath Whisperer. So what he's done is he brings a whole bunch of psychopaths into his lab, and he does brain scans of them, and then he takes the average of the brain scans.
Okay.
And the idea is that this will clarify what parts of the brain are different in psychopaths and regular people. So his finding is that, okay, in the brain, you've got your limbic system, which is sort of in the middle of your brain, and it does all the emotion stuff. And also it's a relay station for the direction of information through your senses to other parts of your brain. That's the limbic system. So it's sort of the emotional brain. But around the limbic system, you think called the paralimbic system. And that interfaces between the limbic system and the rest of the brain. So what Kiehl finds is that that is not as pronounced in psychopaths as regular people. So it's almost like they have the emotional stuff, but it's not interfacing with the rest of the brain as much. And there's some characterization of what's going on there. So that disjunction may be, the thing that's going on.
So it's like they're feeling it, but it doesn't key into the rest of their being.
Yeah, I actually think that there's something here that's been underdeveloped, in my view, in the literature on psychopathy, which is this disjunction. So if you go back to Tleckley's book, he's talking about these case histories of psychopaths. He finds they talk a very good game, but they don't live a very good game. So they don't seem to be able to match up with their words. And many psychopaths or people in that domain, people like Kahneman, they talk a good game, and it's almost like they believe themselves. They at least semi-believe their own bullshit. That's probably why they're kind of convincing. So there've been some characterizations of the human mind divided into, say, the reflective system, reflecting your intellect and higher order cognition, language abilities, and your impulsive system, which is sort of directed towards the satisfaction of goals or automatic behavior. So it's a little bit like the distinction between Freud's id and Freud's ego. So I think what might be going on in psychopaths is that these systems are not really allied. So that would explain, for example, why they're impulsive. If they want to do stuff, their intellect, maybe they can say, well, yeah, I shouldn't do that, but it has no power to restrict, the impulsive part of the brain. So
sorry, go back to those Freudian terms quickly. I think I remember what it is. Ego is like your sense of self, and it is like how you think other people would think of you. Is that what it is?
Not quite. So the id is the repository of all the dark and devious and horrid drives Freud said we had. So sexual,
it's like the Jungian shadow.
Yes, that's correct. Okay. So that's correct. So Jung's had a bunch of archetypes, but yes, the shadow. Well, the shadow's a little bit more complicated, but for many people who are generally good, yes, the shadow would be like the id, a repository of all these drives. So it just seeks satisfaction, operates on the basis of what's called the pleasure principle, the id. Now, there's also the superego, which is sort of like the conscience. According to Freud, that's also semi-unconscious and is the result of some of the things that happened to you as a child. You develop a conscience to resolve your Oedipus complex, he said. Now, you could simply say that, in fact, in psychopaths, they lack a superego and it's all id. That's one way of looking at it. But the job of the ego was to make deals. It was kind of like a Donald Trump. It was always making deals between the id, the reality, and superego. So the ego operated on the basis of the reality principle. It was sort of logical, but it's like you want to satisfy these perverse desires. The superego is saying you can't, and meanwhile, the reality is saying, well, this is possible, right? So you've got this Donald Trump. He's trying to juggle all these. The id is like the deep state, right? The superego are the libertarians complaining about stuff. They're the garden variety Republicans or something like that. Definitely pushing this analogy too far. But in any case, what's happening? Yeah. So one thought would be in psychopaths they lack a superego because they lack a conscience. But the other possibility is they lack an ego, which allows them to strike a deal between the id and the superego. So that's why a lot of them lead very your average psychopath, right, as opposed to your evil mastermind or even some of the more successful serial killers. Your average psychopath leads a life that doesn't really go anywhere. They're often very feckless. They're in and out of prison. They don't have a big life plan. They go from one job to the other. They're criminally versatile. It's fraud one day and it's robbery the next. And they just go from one thing to the other. Nothing really adds up. So it's almost like they lack the capacity, like the ego, to put together a life plan and follow it through. Yeah, so that's what I think. I don't think it's so much a superego, which would go together with the view that they lack a conscience. Probably is some of that. They're id dominated, but I think the other thing is that the ego is just not adequately integrating them. So I think that's what's going on. That certainly is true.
That's what Kent. What was the fellow's name? Kent.
Yeah, Kent Kiehl was his name.
Right. So that's what his research implies.
Yeah. Now I'm not sure he's saying that. He's just trying to characterize neural systems. But to the extent that you have the limbic system of the brain, and it's the part that's not defective, but just the part that integrates it, but the other parts of the brain in particular the forebrain that's associated with moral reasoning and social and self-control and social regulation, then you have a problem. So some studies have shown a particular deficit in a part of the brain called the ventromedial cortex. So the back of the middle of the cortex.
Okay.
So it's sort of underneath the frontal lobes. So people have gone into these particular places, and they find when people have damage to them, they have specific social deficits. And sometimes people do get a bang on the head, or they have a brain tumor, and they start behaving more psychopathic. Yeah, there's some interesting cases along these lines. But the point is, yes, it's not so much that like something is knocked out, but that there's lack of coordination between all the parts of the brain. That's maybe what the suggestion is. Now, the brain's very complicated. I wouldn't, stake my life on this interpretation, but it's one possibility in terms of what's going on. But anyway, the pococurante concept, just to come back to it, it's about not caring, not giving two hoots, not giving a shit. Now that seems like not very sophisticated approach, but it seems to me you can expand the notion of not giving a shit, not giving a damn, to other domains as well as people, right? So if I like empathy, I don't care about people. It's all the same to me. But I think psychopaths also don't care about the truth. Now, what does that mean? Well, why tell the truth? When you care about the truth, or you care about describing the world accurately, you're a true scientist, a true truth seeker, a true philosopher. What's going on? Well, what's going on is this. You say, it doesn't matter what I think. It's what reality says. Right. I'll go with the evidence. I will follow the argument, which is I will defer. Whatever reality says, I will agree with that. And that's putting yourself really in a subordinate position in terms of reality. I think that's what reason is. Reason is deferring to reality. Now, it doesn't come naturally to a psychopath to defer to anybody, least of all reality, right? It's like, that's very annoying. It's like it's felt as an imposition. But they don't really care about it very much. And that's why they lie. Because if you care about reality, it's hard to lie. You kind of feel committed to it in a certain way. If you care about other people, it's hard to mistreat them because you're kind of committed to them. Okay. So I think, and also this squares to the fact that people typically described as psychopaths are compulsive liars or pathological liars. They lie for the sake of it. Often not even instrumentally, but just for the sheer hell of it. And it's like, why? Now sometimes we do that in a very sophisticated way. Like a magician is an interesting case. If you go to a magic show, you enter into a contract with a magician to lie to you, but you kind of give your agreement.
Right. It's similar to suspension of disbelief in the movie or
it is similar to that. That's right.
Yeah.
And fiction is a very important part of our life, and we there's a lot more to be said on that score. But also, reality is for the average person. So I think that the pococurante person, as I'll call them, because I want a different word because I'm redrawing the lines. True, they lack empathy for people, but they also lack a respect for the truth. So the third thing is the future. We don't have to care about the future, and in the long run, we're all dead. So it doesn't make sense to care about it too much. How much you care about the future? Suppose I say I'm going to give you a choice. You can have £100 today, or £110 tomorrow. Which would you choose?
110 tomorrow, easy.
£100 today, £110 in 10 years.
£100 now, because that's.
Okay. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
From the Austrian economics perspective, of course it does, because there's a cost to waiting to receive something. So at some point you make that trade-off. But you can actually measure how much people care about the future by where they draw that line, right? And psychopaths, or your pococurante rather, people, they really prioritize the present over the future. Now, what's interesting, you might go, well, psychopaths are just selfish, but they're not even selfish. They don't even prioritize their own futures because it's a problem with the future in general. Not just other people's futures, but even their own future. Right. That is why they're often feckless and they don't really get anywhere. So that's
So
another thing you don't care about.
there's that experiment where people use it to test emotional intelligence, the marshmallow test, where they do it with children and seeing if
That's another example of it, yeah.
Yeah, if they'll take one marshmallow now or two marshmallows in 20 minutes or something like that. So that might actually be predicting psychopaths at a young age.
Right. So there's some people who've done research, and they do find that how people behaved as young kids predicts their adjustment later on in like 10 years later in adolescence. So they have more problems if they can't defer gratification. So that's called deferred gratification. There you have something to be consumed immediately, and you're shown it, right in your face. In the examples I gave, you typically give money, and it's more abstract. But I think it's basically the same phenomenon. It does make sense to prioritize the present because the future is uncertain. There's a pain involved in waiting and so forth. And indeed, to want anything is to want it sooner rather than later. If I was perfectly indifferent as to when I receive something, you could say I didn't really want it in the first place because it doesn't matter when I get it. To want something is to have a bit of urgency, a little bit of urgency about it. But some people, it's very, very urgent. So for the pococurante person, they want to be satisfied sooner rather than later. Okay, now here's an important point about being nasty. Okay, so I could be the sort of person who is I'm just a nice person. I like pleasing people. When I do something for you and you're happy, it's like, oh, I like it. I enjoy that. It's very enjoyable to me. I'm just a people pleaser, and that gives me my buzz. That gets my dopamine going. But I could be like that, and I could be pococurante. Okay. So I'm the sort of person, I don't really care about you that much, but I do know when I do something for you and you're happy, it makes me happy. I could lie to everybody about how much I do for other people. Yeah. And I could really not care about the future that much. You could
lie to people to make them feel good so you feel good.
So I could, my point here is I could have a nice id. My impulses, my fundamental impulses in life are actually pro-social. I just, the notion of sadism, it just doesn't get me going. Some people like torturing animals for fun, but I just couldn't care less. I prefer to do other things that I prefer pleasing people. That's just the way I'm made. But you could still be pococurante. You could still not really give much of a shit about the future, or surprisingly, not even other people. Like you could help to please yourself, and you could even lie about how much you help. Now, okay, you could be a sadist, and now we're really now you're really getting into trouble, because now I really like torturing people, and I don't care about people. So that's now we have a problem.
And you don't care about the future, so you probably will end up in prison.
I probably will. That's exactly right. But the point is, pococurante doesn't assume what your motives are.
Right.
Whereas your stereotype, your psychopath is like, obviously he's evil intense. He's a sadist. He could be, and probably there's some correlation there. It's probably not completely independent. But I can say, okay, just to redraw the lines, you can have a nice personality, but still be pococurante. So, for example, some homeless people, what could be they could be very. Some of you can sit down and have a very decent conversation with a homeless person, right? Probably even certainly many, right? They seem like decent people. Some of them are unfortunate, but some of them also lack the skills or the constitution just to manage life. And that could be because in some senses they're pococurante. So for example, if they don't really care that much about the future, that might be one reason why they're on the street, because they can't save, they can't make prudent decisions. Now the other thing about the pococurante model is that the three domains where you don't care about, sometimes you can care about two but not the other. So let's suppose I care about people, they're nice. I'm also not only am I not a sadist, but actually I like other people, and I'm able to commit to other people. Also, I tell the truth a lot. I'm committed to reality, but there's one thing I'm not really committed to, and that's the future. I'm a short-term thinker. So you could imagine people who don't get far in life, whether they're homeless or not, just sort of drifters, essentially, drifting through life. They just don't have a life plan. They can't get it together. So they're a bit pococurante in that sense, and that explains it. They might not be pococurante in other senses, and they might have a good heart. Okay. Now, the other reason I think this characterization is good is about characterizing evil people. Now, one view is that the more psychopathic you are, the more evil you are. So Hare had this program on TV where he's characterizing the most evil people, and he's like putting them on his checklist. And the more boxes you take, the more evil you are on the checklist.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
that's
the politicians and the CEOs.
Well, they're more evil. I think they're more evil, but they're not more psychopathic. They're less psychopathic.
But according to Hare, So according to Hare, he would say they're less psychopathic.
I think if I had a chat with him, he might agree. Yeah. But that's actually my claim.
Yeah.
I think the stereotype is more evil, more psychopathic. Like the more hideous and evil it gets, it's completely psychopathic. But I think that's okay. Maybe it is psychopathic, but it's not. That's why I want to redraw the circles and say pococurante. Mm-hmm. You're less pococurante if you're evil in the following way. So it's like the opposite, in fact, of the person I just described. It's not like you're a drifter who's good-hearted. You're the opposite. You are very committed to the future. You can plan. And possibly it really helps if you've got a high IQ, so you can see directly and immediately why it's to your advantage not to just have a short-term interest. You can imagine yourself easily some years from now. So IQ actually is positively correlated with valuing the future as against the present. So if you're like that, but on the other two dimensions, you don't care about people and you don't care about the truth, I have a job for you. A job description, it's politician. You'd be perfect for this role. Yes, you can plan. You're together. Like you're not neurotic. You can plot. You can scheme. You can. Maybe you get involved in a conspiracy of some sort. Great, but we want to make sure that you lack empathy for other people. That's really important too. And also say whatever you want. It just can't be the truth. So your politician, he's pococurante on 2 out of the 3 dimensions.
Yeah.
But not all 3. If he's all 3, he wouldn't be a very good politician. He'd just crash and burn, right? So evil is being less pococurante in 2 respects, but very pococurante in 2, but not in 1, and having that intact capacity. That's the plan and caring about the future. Yeah,
but there is like a spectrum, because a lot of politicians will care about their families, or at least it seems like they do.
Yeah.
So they try to ensure their children's future and this kind of thing. But as for the world in general, maybe what happens to them doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think you bring up a very good point here. So when you talk about the psychopath, you're talking about a general deficit. So that you really can't care about anybody except yourself. It's quite extreme. But what about people with a touch of psychopathy? Now, it turns out another important point you can make about psychopathy, and indeed about all psychiatric disorders, is that they're all on a spectrum. One point of view is like it's a type. There's a psychopath and the rest of us, and never the twain shall meet. And you cross this Rubicon. And it's like there's a hill here, normal people, and there's a valley, and then there's a hill and the psychopaths. And people often think many things are like that, including personality traits. You got your introverts, and you got your extroverts, and in the middle, never the twain shall meet. But it turns out for nearly every psychiatric disorder, it's not like that. There aren't any types, and technically these are called taxons. But when you do tests and look for taxons, you don't find them. Instead, you find a smooth distribution that's usually bell-shaped. So most people are more or less in the middle, introversion, extroversion. There's a few people who are very extroverted, a few people who are very introverted. Most people are somewhere in the middle. Now, when it comes to these dark traits that we've been discussing, it's not a normal distribution, because most people are not sort of semi-assholes. Well, there are different points of view about that, right? But I think assholes are at least in the minority.
Right. Severe case of assholism.
So that's right. I have no problem with these designations, because they're useful at a certain level of analysis just to capture a bunch of things, So I think asshole is actually quite good. It doesn't characterize women very well, there are other terms for that, obviously, but assholeness would cover, generally being antisocial, and you can see psychopathies being, an exacerbation of assholery. So I forgot what we're talking about now. So the general point about continua. So the point is that only a few people have the extreme characteristics. Like, let's say sadism. Most people are not sadistic. Okay, but it's still continuous, right? You'll go up. You'll cover all these steps in between. There is no gap.
A lot of people will have that Schadenfreude.
Schadenfreude, yeah.
But
that's true.
There's a level of that, a level of sadism.
Yeah, so 2 points. The first thing is just the level. The level is smooth. So you'll be working up to every graduation up to the psychopath on all this number of dimensions. So in terms of my model, there will be people who, care about people a lot, who don't care about people at all, and everything in between. Same for the truth and same for the future. And these things will correlate, but they'll be somewhat independent. So there's no dividing line. Well, there's a dividing line you can draw, like between day and night. There's a difference in day and night. But then when it's dusk and dawn, it's up to you to say when the day begins. Okay, we can say when the sun is rising, but in terms of the light, there's so many things like that. It's just a continuum problem. It's general. So you have to draw a line, but there's nothing special about where you draw that line. You could draw it in many places. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. When it comes to politicians, there'll be some who are very low in empathy, very high, and along all these dimensions. Now, the other point you make, though, is that you're not talking generally. You're talking about different domains. You'll care about some things, but not others. So even the psychopaths like that, they will care about themselves more about others. Although I don't think they even care about themselves into the future, but they will definitely care about me here now above you then there, right? And the psychopath will do that, and everybody will do that to some extent. Very few people buy Christmas presents, for their kids, for their kids, but not for the kids next door, right? So we will have an in-group and an out-group, and some people are closer and some are further away. Some people say we shouldn't be like that. We should be completely indiscriminate, sort of hardcore utilitarians like Peter Singer. But most people think, no, it's okay to be a little bit biased. So yes, certainly the pococurante politician or the psychopathic politician will be biased, but that might also be an extension of themselves. Look, it's my trophy wife, it's my trophy kids. Just like I'm decorating my house, I'm going to decorate my kids.
Right. Well, that's a.
So still be very self-involved in that sense.
Well, to tie it back to what we were talking about 3 dimensions and 4 dimensions, the difference between a third-dimensional person imagining what it would be like for a fourth-dimensional being, it is kind of like that because a politician doesn't have that view of the future. So it is like they're living in a slightly different world to us. A pococurante, not a politician.
Well, it's fine. It's it's the same rough territory. It's the same territory, but just drawing circles in different areas. So it's not. I don't think it's only when something crucial hangs on it that it matters. But we can speak in general terms. Yeah, I think that's true. Hans Hermann Hoppe, in his book "Democracy: The God That Failed," makes the point that it's not just the constitution of the politician that matters, but the incentives. So the incentive in a democracy, since the politicians don't own the country, their incentive is basically to get the most out of it while they're in power, at the expense of contributing to it. But if you were a monarch and you own the country or identified with the country, then even if you're narcissistic or psychopathic or pococurante, you might act in the best interest in the country because, well, hell, it's your country. But for the psychopath, it's not their country. It's just,
and your children are going to
their position
as well. So
right, and that's right. Again, the complete psychopath isn't even going to care about their kids. But I have seen some even pretty hardcore psychopaths who do care about their kids. So it can get kind of subtle and complicated. What you care about. The other point is that and maybe this goes back to the surgeon example, is that it's not always good to care about things. Let's suppose there are evil people out there and they're coming to get you and your family. But like all self-respecting libertarians, you're armed, and you repel these people for violating the non-aggression principle in your case. Maybe you should be pretty ruthless in putting them down, because you gave them every chance maybe to exist, but they didn't. They kept coming for you. And you could be a bit psychopathic with respect to them. It wouldn't be appropriate to be empathic. Like, now people may differ on this. There are people who are, say, pacifists, or people who believe in universal love, and maybe they might rankle at the suggestion that it's okay to have hatred in your heart some of the time. My view is that it is okay under some specific circumstances, not as a life choice. Develop hatred in your heart in 3 easy steps. No, but under certain conditions, where there are people, where they're essentially evil people trying to get you, it would be okay to suspend sentiment under those circumstances. You should be ruthless. And again, there are different opinions on this. Some people are pacifists, and they say, look, the fundamental nature of reality is love. You can't return hate with hate. So even if you're a libertarian, you believe you shouldn't initiate aggression. Even if people initiate aggression, you shouldn't return aggression back. So that's a pacifist principle.
Yeah, that's a pretty weird position to take. I know some people actually like that, but they think, what would you do if someone broke into your house? You're just going to lay down, and it kind of blows my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said both ways. On the one hand, it is a little bit like being unduly submissive and sort of basically just cucking, and you're not really recognizing your own value if you do that. I mean, this is your house. This is your stuff.
Yeah.
Is it even your property if you don't show any sign of wanting to protect it? Some people say at least have to give a sign. In law, there's a thing called adverse possession. If people occupy your house and no one makes a claim on it after 10 years, it's like, okay, it's your house. It's you've homesteaded it because no one made a counterclaim.
Yeah.
So at least you have to make a claim on your person and your property. On the other hand, people who are morally enlightened might say something like, yes, I understand. And I even understand the argument that unless you repulse violators of the non-aggression principle, it'll only encourage them. So from a utilitarian perspective, maybe we should punish people who do this. But from another perspective, from a higher perspective, maybe even a Christian perspective, you forgive these people. And even though they want to visit harm upon you, you don't want to visit the same degree of harm upon them. And you say, okay, the lesser evil is for them just to take my stuff.
Yeah.
So I think you can say that. I think you can say that as long without necessarily devaluing yourself, because you are committing yourself to a higher goal. And I think that's a legitimate position. I'm not sure I agree with it. My view is, well, I mean, everybody has their own view, but I think evil is a real thing. Some people don't, but I think if you do decide it's a real thing, then you have to be a bit strict about it. That's my view. But not everybody thinks it's a real thing. And if you don't, a consistent position is just keep being nice all the time.
And things will work out. Oh, maybe.
It's often a good rule for small things. Like if you're having an argument with somebody, suppose somebody shouts at you, and you're like, okay, look, you're shouting at me, but I'm not going to return your anger with anger. That's sort of self-control, constructive response, and it's better because then you don't get into this like big fight, and things calm down, and it's better, right? That's just being civilized. But for serious stuff, like the tax man is appearing on your doorstep.
Well, I do remember.
Let's not follow that logic to its conclusion. But someone's predating you. Don't you have every right to repel them? For most purposes, most people think you do, and you probably should. And to have anything that endures, and certainly if someone attacked your kids, for example, or your parents, it's like I'm not even thinking about this. It doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
If I have to, I will do whatever is necessary. Yeah.
I remember this case where the card player, poker player, David Skolansky, had someone like somebody asked him philosophically, like, what would you do if someone broke into your home? What would you do? And he was like, well, I just let him take the stuff. Like, it's not worth risking my life to try to fight them off or something like that.
That's
and they were like,
pragmatic.
yeah, yeah. And he's a very pragmatic guy. This is a guy, he wrote The Theory of Poker. So it was very statistical and probability and all this stuff. and everybody was like, yeah, right.
He's bluffing.
Yeah, exactly. But then it happened to him.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he did. He's like, all right, well, I'll be your host. Whatever you want, go ahead and take it. You want me to, you're going to tie me up and sit me on the couch, just go ahead. And
that would be very disconcerting for a criminal. It's like, hang on, the script is not going as I thought,
Yes.
It's just like, it's difficult to deal with.
Yeah. Anyway, I wanted to ask, I don't know if you want to answer this, but have you ever met a psychopath or like a hardcore pococurante in real life?
Yes, I have, and from a full disclosure perspective, at least my interest in this has been piqued by meeting those people and trying to make sense of what's going on. Because again, you have this incapacity to grok exactly what they are. But because I'm this curious-minded and I'm a psychologist, I want to figure out what that is, and also you want to get a handle on it. It is kind of a disturbing reality, and you want to get a handle on it. So, yeah, that's what happened, and I guess I don't want to reveal too many details.
Okay.
But I'll say one or two things. So, in the case of one of them. They had a name, and they
were someone of repute, or
no, not of repute. No, a bit pococurante and a little bit feckless, but they had a name. But they said that their name was actually this was a female. Their name that they'd been given was actually a male name, but they wanted to have a female name. So they asked me, would you mind not calling me by my given name, the male name, but call me by the female name, the one that I want? So it actually reminds me a little bit about, respect my pronouns. But I looked it up, right?
Yeah.
And it turned out that the name that they had was a female name already. But more disturbingly, the name they wanted me to call them was a male name.
Okay. Well, that's
now.
Right.
Now, what's going on? I'm like, what's going on here?
Territory, like word names like Tracy used to be a male name, Hillary, and these other things.
No, it wasn't that sort of thing. So, this person actually was foreign. So it wasn't immediately apparent to me that the name was that way. But I looked it up, and that wasn't the case. So what's going on here? So they have a name, and it's perfectly gender appropriate. There's not a problem with it. But they tell me, no, it's gender inappropriate. And then they try and get me to use the gender inappropriate name.
Okay.
What? And just lying to me like that. Why? What instrumental purpose is served? What have they gained?
So you're absolutely sure that...
No, there's no ambiguity about this.
She knew that it was the other way around.
Absolutely. No dispute about this. So this is the pathological lying thing, right?
Yeah.
Firstly, there's no point. There's absolutely no point. I mean, what is the point? It's just sheer perversity, right? It's lying for the sake of lying. It's fucking with somebody for the sake of fucking with somebody for no material gain.
Right.
That's what it is. That's so deeply. I mean, it's not as if it's pathological. Like I want to take over the world and I have a plan. It's like it's so petty.
Yes.
It's so petty. What's the hardest thing to understand about it is like going to all this trouble just to be this petty. You haven't achieved anything, nothing. But that's how superficial they are. The hallmark is sheer superficiality. They don't really have, unlike other, like we have commitments. We're committed to the truth or reality or libertarianism or whatever. We have some sort of commitments, right? But they don't have any. So the result is a lot of their behavior just goes nowhere. It's just flippant and meaningless and just pointlessly spiteful. Like what, you know.
Well, this is like the other thing you told me when we spoke about this the other day. You said about how they identify with certain statements like I am everybody and nobody.
Yeah, this is a really odd thing, right? So one of the things I want to do is try and characterize the nature of the pococurante person, right? Because it's fascinating. You want to get a grip of, well, what makes a person do this sort of thing? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Now, the approach standardly in psychology and psychology these days is to, you know, try and measure people along all these dimensions and say it's this dimension, that dimension. There's more constructive approaches too that try to say, well, they've disorder in processing emotion, that sort of thing. But I kind of want to go a little bit deeper into it and sort of characterize, you know, what's going on. What is going on in these cases? Can we sort of give a general characterization of it? So that's what I've tried to do with this model, right? Is to try to say people, you know, just don't care about these things because they just don't have a commitment, not just to other people, and that's typical, but to the truth and to the future. So that's sort of what I'm trying to do in giving this characterization. So when this person said these things to me, like what is she doing? Well, no commitment. I mean, it doesn't achieve any instrumental goal. It's just here and now.
She kind of did have a commitment because she followed through with it, right? Because she was like, no, please call me this other name.
It was something that was said at one point, and there wasn't really much follow through.
Okay.
To be honest.
Okay.
So it wasn't as if in future right. So it might be like she strictly enforced this rule, but it was just something that was off the cuff at one point. I'm like, what the hell?
I see.
Yeah. So it was kind of bizarre in that sense. So what was the other point you made? What was the point you made after that?
The statements that people...
The statement, yes. Yeah. Okay. So to give this general characterization, part of what I want to do is I think it's a problem of identity, right? I think the problem isn't that, look, you've got a specific deficit, say, in emotional processing. Like you don't process fear stimuli as well. I think it's a general problem of integration. So if it's a general problem of integration, it should manifest itself at the level of selfhood, a level of identity generally. Because that's where everything comes together. Who I am, my experience of myself as a whole, as a gestalt, that's identity. So we should find deficits in identity among people who are pococurante or people who are psychopaths. So I'm like, okay, let's think of some dimensions of identity. Well, there are two dimensions. One is right here, right now, you see yourself in a certain way. You've a self-concept. You make sense of yourself. We're going to call that synchronic identity, SYN. So in the moment, right here, right now, everything comes together at the same moment, all at the same time, synchronic. But there's also diachronic identity, which is identity over time. Who you are in the past is who you are in the future, is who you are in the present. And you identify equally with these. Now, probably you'll get deficits in diachronic identity because let's suppose I'm only interested in impulsively doing something now. I don't really care about my future self. My future self can go to hell, you know. I'm never going to brush my teeth, and my future self, where all my teeth fall out, they can go to hell. But if I'm conscientious and think about the future, it's me now is me in the future, right? That's the way of thinking about it. So if psychopaths are not like that, if they're pococurante for the future and we know they're impulsive, they will have a defect in their diachronic identity. So you'll find less consistency over time. But we also, maybe even in synchronic identity, there's going to be a deficit. Well, this is where it gets a little bit metaphorical again. But if I'm not committed to other people, the future, or to the truth, it's almost like I'm not really there. So going back to the point we started with about vampires and shape-shifting interdimensional lizards, they're not really fully embodied and instantiated like we are here. They're like these demons that they're like spirits that are possessing a body, like a vessel, but they're not really in there. Okay, I'm not endorsing demonology.
Leprechaun playing with the levers, and it's like, oh, what does this thing do?
It's something like that, but they're not really fully present. They haven't. I would say they haven't fully materialized as human beings, because if they did, they would start being committed to other people, committed to the future products, committed to the truth. But it's something like they're not really there, so they can sort of play. It's like they haven't become fully materialized. Now that's a very vague notion, but it's something like that. And I think this accounts for why they seem so alien. Eventually you get to know what they're like, and it's like you get the feeling there's a vacuum. There's nothing there behind those dark eyes. That there's something missing. That these things you take for granted, existentially being human, it's just disconcertingly absent, and they feel alien. And you're looking into this sort of abyss. It's like, what why are you saying that to me? Like, what isn't stopping you from saying bullshit stuff like that? So they are a bit bullshitty, and bullshit is not the same as lying. So there's a philosopher called what's his name? It'll come back to me. But he has a book, Harry Frankfurt, a respected philosopher. He has a book called On Bullshit, a very small book, and he discusses the concept of bullshit. And he says bullshit is not like ordinary lying. When you lie, usually a lie is pretty serious. Okay, so I'm lying to you because I want to defraud you, or I'm lying to you because I have a terrible secret. But bullshit is different. Bullshit is just, I don't care about the difference between the truth and lying, so I'm just going to bullshit you. So it's that like pococurante about the difference between truth and reality, right? And this is kind of where I got my idea. I put together the Frankfurt notion, and I think this is what's going on with psychopaths. I was being bullshitted about this person's name, right? For no reason. It's just like I don't care. I don't care. It's 360 degrees different from the truth. I'm just bullshitting you, right? When you ask them about their identity, then, right? What I'm thinking is they don't really have one, because they're not really, like, when I think about myself, I have some fairly clear-cut ideas about how I am, and I'm sort of committed to them.
Yes.
Now, the self is a big mystery. I have no idea what I am existentially in the final analysis, whatever. But, who I am sort of matters to me. It sounds very egotistical, but like it does, and also in a non-egotistical sense. Like I don't want to be a hard person. I want to be this type. I have an ideal self, the self I feel obliged to be. So I think these are all kind of missing in the psychopath. But it's hard to get at it because they will just say things. Like they'll say, do you believe that love, the universe is all about love? Yeah. Like it's so easy to say stuff. And because they're bullshitters and it doesn't really matter, they can say stuff often better than other people can and be very, very convincing because there's nothing holding them back. Like if you tell me, okay, tell me, Aiden, what's the truth about psychopathy or the landscape? If I was Pococurante, I'm like, let me tell you, Kurt, this is how it is. A lot of people think it's like this, but they don't know what to talk about. It's like this. I'm overflowing with all this certainty and narcissism. But actually, that's not me. I'm like, this is a difficult situation. I'm going to level with you, Kurt. Like this does my head in, and there's no simple solutions. Ain't nobody got time for that shit because it's very complicated. That's not the message people typically want to hear. It's like, no, right. It's X, Y, and Z, and that's how it is. And there's some virtue in keeping it simple, right?
So that's why bullshit can work, I guess. Cause
yes, yeah. So they can bullshit effectively, but again, the Pococurante person has a problem with themselves because they're not committed to the distinction between truth and error. Now, sometimes, again, they will be instrumental. They will lie. They'll have a con. But also, it's just like they don't really give a shit. Like truth, lies, whatever. How would it apply to themselves? Right.
I think it's from Mark Twain or somebody, and he says it's so much easier to tell the truth because that way I don't have to keep track of all my lies.
That's right.
And in this case, it's like they don't care about keeping track of it. Just say whatever. A new situation comes up. Just
say whatever comes into your mind, and it doesn't matter if you're consistent.
That's right. It's a totally instrumental view of truth, right? Essentially, the truth is whatever works. Now, disturbingly, Jordan B. Peterson, he sometimes asks questions about the nature of truth. But he came out recently, he said, the thing about like lies is that, they just don't work. And that's not really the distinction between truth and falsity, right? It's like, if you're going to reduce truth and falsity to what's effective, well, if you're a politician, you tell a lie, it's effective. That doesn't make it true. I mean, it's lack of correspondence to reality that makes it false, or correspondence to reality that makes it true. Okay, so what about their identity?
Work in the short term, and I guess they might work 2 terms for a lot of politicians.
Yeah, but lies can be functional. So the utility argument just fails terribly. It's about correspondence to reality. I've often seen many philosophers say, well, truth is hard to define. And how do you define the correspondence? Because you have to specify both terms and how they line up. And it's difficult to do that, because how can you specify reality independently of the proposition? And they bring up lots of complexities, fair enough. But at the end of the day, a statement is true if it corresponds to reality. Like, you just can't get away. If you start getting away from that, you're in real trouble. Anyway, psychopaths might not care about this thing. So suppose they give an account of themselves. Who are you? Who are you? They don't know. They don't really care, and they could be a person one day from the next. So this would be the Machiavellian side. They can present a persona that works in various situations, precisely because there's nothing inside holding that persona back. Like, I could pretend to be this person, that person. But it's kind of difficult for me. Like, I'm not saying I'm always truthful, but I am saying I actually have difficulty telling lies. Like, because I'm just like, I'm saying this thing, it doesn't correspond to reality, and that's just no good. They're like, no problem. Reality, schmeality. I'll say this, I'll say that. So when they give an account of themselves, their own identity, who are they? Now, here's the answer, I think. They're not anybody, if it's extreme. There's no one thing that they are. I think I am this. I have this feeling of thisness about myself. They don't have this feeling of, they're like, there's nothing there to relate to. So we asked some questions to try and get at deficits in synchronic identity. Okay. And I just on a whim, I put in these weird things like, I am everybody and nobody. Or I am a mystery to which there's no solution. Now, in some metaphorical sense, those could be true. I think, for example, I am a mystery to which there's no solution. But I think that in a philosophically complex way. But I'm everybody and nobody. Maybe I'm taking a hardcore psychedelic drug, and it's true. But under normal circumstances, I'm like, I'm not everybody, nobody. This is who I am. So we call this crypticity, from the word cryptic, that it's just sort of, it's not hiddenness and oddity, and you can't figure it out, or it's just doing your head. It's like, it doesn't mean anything. So we find that when people score highly on these dark triad traits or measures of psychopathy, they're higher in crypticity. So if I say things like, it doesn't really bother me when I hurt other people, answers on that question like that correlate positively with, I'm a mystery to which there's no solution. Isn't that weird?
So I think we'll actually be honest about that.
Well, you don't know if they're being honest or not. This is one of the problems. Like right. The statement, I never tell lies. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. But the funny thing is that, it actually works both ways, because if I don't really care, I'm just going to tell anyway. Right? If I want to give socially desirable responses, I'm the sort of person who's interested in being socially desirable. Whereas if you ask me, do you enjoy torturing small animals in your spare time? If I don't care enough not to torture the animals, I'm probably not going to care enough not to tell you. So they're not necessarily hiding. And these are anonymous questionnaires, but I mean, it is a problem. How do you get beyond it? Ultimately, you can't get completely beyond it. Yeah. So we find anyway this strange, and this correlation only makes sense. You wouldn't predict it normally. It's not obvious that people who endorse items that suggest that who they are is this odd, cryptic, mysterious thing are the same people statistically. I mean, not always the same, but there's a correlation between the people who endorse these psychopathic items. So that suggests that there's something weird going on. Now, this research is preliminary, and we want to do a bigger study with different measures of psychopathy and different dimensions and see what matters. One thing I think that we may find is the boldness dimension. People having this fearless dominance, that's probably going to be associated with maybe a more definite identity. But other stuff maybe not associated with that. Yeah, so I guess what I was trying to do is try to give an account of psychopathy at a higher level of analysis, or pococuranteism at a higher level of analysis to see what's going on. A lot of it's very reductionistic. They're trying to say, well, you got your psychopath, and they have this deficit here, or they have this issue with the brain here. But I think there's still more mileage to be given in trying to give an overall account of it. And if you go back and you read books like Cleckley's The Mask of Sanity, that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to give an overall account of it in general terms. And I think that's something that you're not really seeing a lot in the modern scientific literature. It's more like little debates about exactly how much of this trait is there, or they've difficulty processing fear and different types of emotions. So there's mileage to be got. You've got to fill in different pieces of the picture. But, looking at identity can be useful. But it's also very challenging because, again, if you ask somebody, like, who are you? Are you everything and nothing? There are a lot of reasons to be skeptical about the sorts of answers they give. Like, firstly, if you feel you're everything or nothing, are you really everything or nothing? And secondly, how do you know if you're everything or nothing or not?
Well, I'm not sure if a pococurante would think about it on that level. I mean, they just see the statement and be like, yeah, I'm kind of like that. And maybe they give you a full answer if you're lucky. Yeah.
So it is hard to look at identity as well. But we hopefully will find that we find identity deficits. So, for example, if we ask people about their identity one day, and then you ask them on a different day, if you have more fluctuations from one to the other, then you can sort of objectively show there are changes over time. There's an interesting test of identity or description of identity where you simply you ask people, say, who are you? And they answer in 10 or 20 questions, say. And you can say whatever you want. So if I ask you, Kurt, who are you? What are some of the things you would say? Just give me 2 or 3.
I'm a musician, a podcaster. I'm a nice person.
Okay. So the things you mentioned, you could extend that list indefinitely. But the first things you mention are clearly going to be things that are important to your identity, right? If psychopaths don't have such important things, then there may be less consistency in the list they come up with, for example. And that's something you can document more objectively, you see. Whereas if you're committed to something, you're committed to being a nice person, that'll come up a lot. Now, of course, they might be able to play the system. It's a bit tricky, but still you might have some evidence of identity deficit like that if they don't know it's about this and they take part in a study on repeated occasions and you find more fluctuation in how they self-define, you're like, well, why are they self-defining in these different ways from day to day? Don't they have some identity that's enduring? There we are. You start be able to get at that idea.
Well, that's interesting. Sometimes applying for jobs, they would give me these tests, and they're sort of like personality tests, and ostensibly they're meant to measure morality. So they ask you questions like, everybody kind of takes a pen from the office every now and then. Do you agree 1 to 5 or something like that? And they'd always say at the start of the test, be sure to tell the truth, because this test is designed to see if you're lying or something like that.
It sounds like a mind fuck, doesn't it? It's like, what should you do?
Yeah, well, I always just told the truth and hope for the best. I mean, sometimes you have to admit that take a sick day occasionally, or I don't know what. But,
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the optimal score you would want from that test would be for an employer.
Yeah, because if you get a perfect score,
right,
you look like a liar.
Right. So it seems like you'd probably want a not quite perfect score. But then you would be aware that any intelligent person would figure this out and have the same thoughts we've just had. So you're like, actually now, the person who gives that score is probably the person who's gaming the system. And you have this infinite regress of reciprocal psychology or something. I don't know. So my belief is that those tests are not particularly useful.
Well, maybe not.
But I would just leave 10p on the desk after the interview, and if it's still there, you get like the hardest guy.
Right. Yeah. Well, my thought is maybe you could use something like that to see the level of consistency that people have in the beliefs or their identity. If you have these, 100 questions to see how consistently people answer.
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky. Because they're not caring about stuff, they may end up giving brazen answers. But on the other hand, to the extent that they want to manipulate you, they may give the answers they think you want to hear. So you can have two contrary tendencies pushing in opposite directions, so that it ends up being a wash.
So, well, that raises an interesting question too, because they do actually have a mask. Like, they will have a consistent identity for maybe an hour or something while you meet them, and maybe every time you meet them, they'll try to be the same person.
Right.
But in different situations, when they meet different people, they'll just put on a different mask, right?
Yeah. So again, it's difficult to generalize in all cases, and you have graduations. So there's an interesting personality variable developed in the personality and social psychology field, and it's slightly misnamed, but it's called self-monitoring. And people are high in self-monitoring or low in self-monitoring to some degree. A high self-monitor is somebody who's very keenly and typically aware of how they are going down in a social setting. So they're aware of the impressions they're making and keen to make a good impression. Such people are big on appearance, big on seeming, to look well. So your yuppie or your preppy, they're going to be high in self-monitoring. At the opposite end, then you have people low in self-monitoring. It's really self in a situation monitoring. That's why it's a slight misnomer. But someone low in self-monitoring, what they're always keen to do is to be authentic. They want to express their inner values more. And this personality variable was first investigated in respect of the link between attitudes and behavior. And what they found was people low in self-monitoring, who are always keen to be true to their inner values, showed a higher link between their attitudes and their behavior. But people higher in self-monitoring, who are basically more contextually sensitive, kind of like social chameleons, who are changing what they say to fit the context, the link for them between attitude and behavior was a bit lower. So that's sort of why the interest got into it. But that sounds a little bit like what the mask that psychopaths are producing, but maybe not quite as intense. So it sounds also a little bit like Machiavellianism, where you're manipulating people, most probably by projecting a certain identity.
Yeah, but it is also a kind of empathic trait, isn't it? Because you want to relate to people more and emphasize different things to get along with people.
Yes. So this is an interesting question. So I mean, why do we wear clothes? Keep warm, but it's also to keep up appearances, and also so we're not embarrassed all the time. We keep up appearances socially, right? So we wear clothes to that, but then we could also focus on our appearance and make ourselves look nicer for other people. There are different opinions about how much you should do that. If you look at people on the right wing and the left wing, for example, I think on average you see differences. The left wing are more ragtag, and the right wing are sort of, we polish the buttons on our uniforms. I think you can sort of see this difference coming out a little bit. But yes, I think, we do also change our opinion for other people. So I think the point you're trying to make is that, you might say it's good to be authentic all the time and just reflect how I'm feeling. But actually, it can be adaptive to adjust yourself to other people for their benefit. That's actually a pro-social thing to do.
Yeah.
Although it might seem it's like the superficial thing to do. But it's almost like you can have a certain depth in superficiality if you're keeping up appearances. I think the modern trend is to be more relaxed about things like that, including in things like using honorifics. Like my students very rarely say, Dr. Gregg in emails. They'll say, "Hi, Aiden," even the first time they've met me. And a student came up the other day and said, "Professor Gregg," I'm like, I was shocked. Like, oh my God, I can't take this level of respect. So why do we do that? Well, it's a way just of it's social graces, right? And it's keeping appearances. The older I get, the more I think things like that are kind of important, just to help us regulate ourselves socially. So that is one thing you do find in these people that often, and this is another point I think is important, is that people are often very taken by psychopaths. You can be taken in very effectively by them. Con men are often a little bit psychopathic. Why? Well, they must have something that really is very, very appealing. Like the appearance the mask must be something that's very satisfying, something that has a strange allure. Now, this may only be a subset, but I think I have a theory about this as well. So my theory is that human beings are kind of complex creatures ridden with lots of contradictions. We have our lizard brain, we have our emotional brain, then we have a cortex on top. And these guys, they're not always in harmony. So I think Freud was right about that. He was right to draw attention to the fact that our mind is often in conflict. We have impulses, but we also have to constrain our impulses, and that can be annoying. But what I think I think psychopaths are simpler creatures than regular human beings. They're simpler. My suggestion is that the reason why they're often so compelling is that it's almost like they're mainstreaming, or not mainstream, but sort of directly streaming basic human energy. It's almost like to be a civilized person, you have to take, this is kind of Freudian, I guess, but you have to take your impulsive energy, not all of which is bad. So it's not completely Freudian, but you have to manage it, and you have to put it through certain channels, and you have to make some compromises. You have to strike some deals. But with the psychopath, because they haven't made any deep commitments to the future, to other people, or even to themselves, or to the truth, you sort of see human energy or impulse in the raw, and it has this compulsive and addictive and delicious character to it. And we can if you look at lower animals, for example, they don't have all the conflicts human beings do. They're guided by instinct. They essentially act on impulse. The dog doesn't say, "Well, I'll leave my dinner till later," or "I'm watching my figure." He doesn't. He's a simpler creature. He's living in the now. He's living in the moment. I think psychopaths are creatures of the now and the moment, and there's something in their energy which is appealing, and it may even have great sort of value, at least for a limited time, and people are turned on to that. They can't help responding to it because it's just sort of raw. So it's almost like processed sugar or something, right? In evolutionary history, to get some sugar, had to have a banana, but the sugar was integrated with the rest of the constituents. But then someone makes pure sugar, or you can make the same argument about the cocoa leaf and cocaine. With pure cocaine, it's much better than chewing that leaf. I thought the leaf was good, but this stuff, my God, it's so direct. So it's almost like they're purified. And I think the analogy goes further, right? It can be great. You get that high, but it's addictive, and it's going to destroy your life, probably.
And it's just completely empty. It's no nutritional
and it's empty
value. Yeah.
There's no nutritional value. Very good. Yes. And also, it's not hooked into anything else. Like, you take the drug, and the drug isn't linked into a series of goals. Like so let's suppose you're a musician, right? You'll get a high from performing, and you'll get a high from struggling to work at a piece and do very well. But that's linked into this part of your life that you're developing. It's hooked into it. But if you take a drug, well, I'm just activating that dopamine center in my brain, and it's not linked to anything else. So the psychopath's a bit like that. It can be very compelling and compulsive and even addictive, but it's not linked to any life goals. And indeed, it's contrary to those life goals. But I think to understand why they sometimes work, you have to give an account of that. And I think they're giving you humanity, something less than humanity, almost uniting us with the simpler aspects of our nature in this very direct way. And that's what accounts for that magic that they can create. So, yeah.
So do you think that psychopaths and pococurante can actually teach us something deeper about humanity because it's like this simplified version of humanity?
Yes, I think so. Here's another analogy that occurred to me. So someone's walking down the street and says, we were talking about bananas. There's a banana skin on the ground and they step in it and they fall over it and they slip on a banana skin. This is actually hilarious. Firstly, because it's, that's the joke, but you've never seen it happen. But actually, they are extremely slippy, and the person falls over. And for a moment, you're like, that is the funniest thing ever. And then you're like, no, they've injured themselves. You're like, oh my God.
Right.
I really feel... Being a psychopath is not having the secondary reaction. Right? So yes, but that fun, that joy, that directness that you get when something funny happens, I would say the first part of that is actually a little bit psychopathic. It's all about the energy, all about the joke. It's just for the psychopath, the joke never stops, and that's very, very superficial. The other thing I think is there are some things that are funny for us because they're so bad. So there's a terrible joke. It's like, what did the one-legged child who'd lost both parents get for Christmas? Cancer, right? Now, why is that funny? It's actually funny because it's tragic.
Yeah.
And when we tell the joke, we're like, oh, we shouldn't laugh at that. And that's exactly what makes it funny. I think for a psychopath, they wouldn't find that joke especially funny.
Right.
Because they don't identify with the tragedy inherent in the joke that makes it ironic. So it's not really been fully studied, but I would maintain pococurante people can't appreciate irony because to appreciate irony, you need to appreciate the depth, right? So gallows humor is like, well, there is tragedy in life, and that's why we laugh about it. But the psychopath doesn't appreciate the tragedy, so they can't have the comedy. The Irish poet Patrick Kavanagh said that tragedy is underdeveloped comedy.
Yes.
And that's kind of right in the sense that there are some types of humor that are dependent on the appreciation of tragedy. So the psychopath might find, sadism makes them giddy. Someone slips on a banana skin and, they're hurt. That's really funny. But yeah, so I think you're right. I think it does help us appreciate something about us. And I think that what it helps us appreciate is what makes us human. The bit on top of the chuckle we have when someone is on a banana skin, or why we find gallows humor funny because we recognize these serious things. And I think the reason we do is we're committed to them. We're committed to life, committed to others, committed to the future, committed to the truth. These things matter. And the psychopath is giving us humanity without being fully human. And I think we do have this experience. And that's I think that's quite a profound thing,
Yeah.
It often surprises me. Like there's so many things in the psychopath that are working correctly, but it doesn't all come together into something we'd say, well, that's humane. That's so, that's human. That's such a human. The feeling is it's all the parts are there, but this doesn't quite stick together. That's the feeling. So, but again, in saying that there's something of value, it might be nice to say that we're dealing with things that are very bad and we must oppose its evil and all sort of stuff. And I think that's true. But life is complicated. They also, I think, do give us a sign about like raw energy, chaotic energy. Now we have to take that and turn it into something good. Okay, so Jung would say, you've got the shadow, but maybe the shadow is like energy that isn't fully directed, you know. So I think even in quite pathological psychopaths, you do have these sides to them that are compelling. I mean, why do people find, you know, serial murderers and cult leaders compelling? They're really horrid people. But I think it's because, I think this needs to be explained. I think it's because they're mainlining this energy that we don't normally get in its raw form as human beings. And that's initially very attractive to them. It's sort of like psychic cocaine. These people have this compelling power. I think typically I'm quite immune to it. I find a lot of people getting, I guess maybe anarchists have this experience too. We see a lot of people getting excited about, you know, a lot of people like politicians, and we're like, you know, gee, that's a bit sad, you know. Why is everybody jumping on these bandwagons? You know, it seems, I don't know what you see in the guy, frankly. Yeah, that's the nature of charm, the nature of allure, the nature of that people can exert, but that might be what it is. So it's just like, in the same way, we need to understand that we can develop addictions to things like sugar, and we need to fight against it or understand. That doesn't mean that we can't enjoy a delicious dessert or that dessert is intrinsically bad, but it does mean that it'll rot our teeth if we do a lot of it, and if it's not properly integrated, you know.
Yeah. So if we have politicians like working as a cleaner in the government building instead of running the show, maybe things will work out better.
I think so.
Thank you so much for listening. Remember to press like, press subscribe. Remember to check out the Multiversity podcast, at multiversitypodcast.com. So it's a new podcast for exploring higher dimensional learning. When we talk about a lot of interesting subjects, we're trying to be intellectually rigorous while exploring ideas like physics, quantum mechanics, entropy, theater, improvisation, and the mask that we wear, the shape of the ego, the sense of the self. So I hope you check it out, multiversitypodcast.com. Thank you so much. Take care.